Good evening, everyone. It's Renee here. I see we have quite a few attendees. Can you guys just please indicate to me that the sound is fine tonight? I believe last night there were some problems with the sound. So we just need to check that everyone can hear. So if you can just type in a yay or a nay, please. I'll give you a minute or so. Okay, I see we have some yeses. Okay, great. Welcome everyone. Tonight is the second and the last online tutorial for the second semester 2017 on research theory. And just welcome to everyone who's joining us. In terms of the progress for tonight, okay. There we are, there are the slides. Okay, so what are we going to do tonight? There are 11 learning study units in your learner guide and in your textbook, so it is impossible to cover everything in a 2-hour session. So the main objective of tonight is really just to prepare you for the upcoming exam. So what am I going to do? I am really going to tackle each of the study units and then just cover the main aspects. And then during our discussion tonight, I will also, you will see that clearly it's marked, the slides with a red star. And the slides that are marked with a red star are really, that's the type of questions that were asked in the previous 3 exams. Now, the reason why I'm only concentrating on the previous 3 exams is really the whole content of these modules changed at the end of 2015. So there are really only 3 exams to go on. And what I've done is I've worked through each exam paper. I looked at what was asked previously, and I made sure that it's covered for tonight. But a warning, I'm not the examiner, and I really have no clue what is covered in your exam paper. So when I cover these things, it doesn't mean it's going to be asked in the exam paper. It's just to give you an indication on how to prepare yourselves for the upcoming exams. So if that's okay with you guys, I think let's just kick off the evening session and don't waste too much on the introductions. Okay, so the first study unit is really, it's about the practice of market research. And the main things that you need to know when you work through this unit is you need to understand what do they mean by the nature of research. Then secondly, why do people do research? What is the contribution? What are the reasons for that? And I think as with lots of things in life, nothing is perfect because we don't live in a perfect world. So there are limitations to research. And it's important that you guys also understand that. Then we're quickly going to touch base on the different roles within the research environment. And then we're also going to look at the ethical framework and why that's important. So let's kick off with study unit 1. Okay. So the nature of research. As it was discussed previously as well, there are 2 components in the world out there. On the left-hand side, you have consumers, you have customers, you have businesses. And on the total opposite of that continuum, you have a business or organization. Now, the business or the organization operates within its framework, within that organization, and it offers a service, it offers products, it offers a combination. And it offers this service or products to consumers, the market, the external environment out there. Now, for the business to be in touch with their consumers or their customers or the businesses that they deliver a service with, they need to really understand that external environment. They need to know what are the needs, the behavior, the expectations, the wants. How do they perceive certain things? What are their attitudes? The image of the company, etc. And how does this business actually tap into the minds of these consumers and customers? They do it through market research. They do it through inquiry, observation, investigation. So you will see that market research is actually a link between your business, your organization on the one side, and the market out there, the customers, the consumers, potential customers, businesses. And in all my years in market research, I've always said, when I was in market research, I'm the voice of the customer. If you really want to know what your customers want from you, how they feel about certain things, what their expectations are, speak to me. I'm representing the customer because I did a lot of market research and I've really understood our environment at that stage. So that's really to put market research in perspective. But market research has value, as I said, and it also has its limitations. It, it really gives you an idea of what's happening in the external market. It helps you to identify opportunities. It helps you to identify your own weaknesses. If you really research the external market, you will be able to establish what are potential threats out there. The same way you can use market research to really understand your market. Who are they? Who are your customers? What are what's their demographic profile? Who are your competitors? Do your customers differ from your competitors' customers? So you can really get to grips with understanding the whole environment the company is operating in. And that way you will really build a significant knowledge of what's happening in the external market. It can also, it can help the company to measure satisfaction levels with the service, with the product. It can help them to really build relationships, to develop new strategies. It can be a marketing strategy, it can be a communication strategy, it can be a business strategy. And market research doesn't only help you to develop it, it also helps you to test it. Because sometimes when you're in an organization, you're so close to it that you lose a little bit of touch with the customer out there. So if you developed a strategy, it's really great to go back to your customers and just test their reaction so that you can understand whether it is meeting their needs and expectations. Also, with the development of strategies, it's a whole circle. You understand your market, you develop your strategy, you start developing actions, you implement it, and then you have to follow through with the circle. Then you have to evaluate your strategy, you have to understand your market again, whether any changes. So it's a constant loop, you never stop. You can test your marketing campaigns, you can whether it actually speaks the language of the consumer. You can test it whether it's past its shelf life. You can monitor the success of any marketing activities, and it really helps you to understand the customer out there. But on the right-hand side, it has limitations. If you really don't understand the business problem, you can end up doing the wrong research. And I promise you, we will get to the differences between business problem, market research problem, etc. We will cover it in detail. So just bear with me a little bit. If you don't define your research problem in detail, then you're also going to end up with poor research. If your brief is poorly written, if you don't have sufficient information, if you embark on the wrong design, if you choose the wrong methodology, if you choose maybe quantitative research, but you really want to understand the emotions about it, then it's probably the wrong methodology, the way you execute your research. And then there's also a skill in terms of interpreting the results. And if you do that in the wrong way, you can make the wrong deductions. Timing. If you do it at the wrong time, if you do it too late, if you want to maybe pre-test your ad campaign, but you leave it till too late and it's not worth it to make any changes, then there's no sense in doing it. The misuse of research or the non-use, and that also happens in the real world out there, that you embark on this research campaign and then in the end no one actually implements the findings, the conclusions of the research, or they misuse it in the sense that they apply the findings the way they would like to and not really looking at what the feedback is from the market. So it's very important that you understand what the value of market research is and the limitations. And as you can see with the red star, this was a question that was asked previously. It actually asked you to discuss 10 contributions or applications for research and 5 limitations. Oops, I just skipped a slide. Okay, and as I said, you also have to understand the different roles in the research industry. There are 3 key players in the research industry. There's the research buyer. That is the person that actually commissions the research. So it is someone within a business or organization, within the marketing department, who actually liaise with the research supplier, your next component, to say this is the research that we would like to do, etc. So they liaise with the research supplier and commission the research. The research supplier is then in constant liaison with the client, and that can be the buyer or the user. They need to clarify that it is the right research problem. They have to design the research. They have to write a research proposal. And then they have to implement the research project. They have to manage it. They ultimately have to analyze it. The data, they have to interpret it, and they have to report on the findings. Now, usually they will report on the findings or present it to the research user. The research user sits within the organization. It is the person who has the need for the information. And quite often the research buyer and the research user is the same person, but not always. An example is you can be the market research manager for BMW, and you will get a research request from a product manager on a new prototype. Now, the buyer is the research manager. The buyer is the person who will liaise with the research supplier. The user is the product manager. The product manager will take that findings and implement it. But as I said, sometimes your research buyer and your research user is one and the same thing. It can be that in an organization, the marketing manager liaises directly with the research supplier regarding research that they want to do. That marketing manager is then the buyer and the user. So I hope that the distinction between the buyer and the user makes sense, and that you also understand that then in the middle there is the research supplier. That is the agency that actually conducts the research. Now, in research there is ethics, and in most countries you will get a research governing body, and research companies and research users are usually members of this governing body. And this governing body is sort of a watchdog over the research industry in that country. They set the standards, what is allowed and what's not allowed. So it's basically what's in and what's out. And these standards or ethics are there to protect all the players in the research industry. It protects the researcher, the buyer or the user. It protects the research agency, and it also protects the participant in the research project. Now, it is important to understand that the protection of the participant, just excuse me, I just want to take off my jacket because it is extremely hot in this room. Okay, let's carry on. It's very important to protect the participant and their rights. And you will see that every country where there is a governing body, they will have minimum standards. And the basics are the participant's participation is always voluntary. You can never force anyone to participate. They can always decline at the beginning or during the project. At any given time, it's their right to say, well, stop the bus, no more, I'm out of here. The second aspect is anonymity, confidentiality. Under no circumstances can that participant's name, contact details be revealed. Under no circumstances can anything that that participant said in the research be linked to their name and then reported on it like that. What they said can be reported on, but it can never be linked to a specific person. The participant must give their consent, that they're happy to participate. At all times, you must guarantee that there's no harm. Why is that important? Everywhere in the world, we find people out there that are looking, as an example, for opportunities to commit crime. So, under no circumstances will we ask, for instance, what's your bank account number? What's your PIN number? Or will we try and sell someone something? Or will we reveal their personal details in such a way that someone else can harm them? There needs to be lots of transparency. That participant needs to know exactly what are they in for. How is the research going to be conducted? Will someone interview them? Who will interview them? Which company is conducting the research? In other words, for which company is that interviewer working? The research agency. How long is the interview going to take? Are you going to give them an incentive afterwards? And also, who is the sponsor of the research? Which company has requested the research? So that's the protection of the participant. In that same way, the research agency is also protected in the sense of if something goes wrong, if they adhere to this, then they're protected. And in the same way, the researcher. So ethics in research is very important. And for the guys who are in South Africa, the South African governing body is SAMRA, the South African Market Research Association. They have a website. They, if you go onto their website, you will also see they have a code of conduct and exactly what you can and can't do. It's a whole legal document. And in all my years, I have never used a supplier that wasn't a member of SAMRA, because it was, to me, very, very important that that research supplier is ethical and that they abide to the rules, the minimum standards. Okay, so that's study unit 1. So just to sum up, in terms of what happened in the past, they've asked about how do you use research and what are the limitations. Doesn't mean they're going to ask it again, but you have to understand what is market research, the role of market research, who are the different role players in market research, what is ethics in market research. So that's very important. That brings us to study unit 2, types of market research. So what are the things that's a non-negotiable? You have to understand and be able to describe the different types of research. You need to know the basics of each type of research. How do you use it? what is research design, the whole process in research design, and then key aspects that you need to know. So let's fire away. It is important to understand that market research always starts with either a problem or an opportunity. So either something has happened and they need to fix it, and they don't know why it happened, or they don't know how to fix it, or there's maybe an opportunity, maybe an opportunity to go in a joint venture, to market a new product, increase price, to try and develop a new target market. So that's how research usually starts. And before you go into the research design, it is important to understand this model, because this is what research is about. Usually that inquiry, that problem or opportunity leads to an inquiry. That inquiry can be exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, or causal. What do we mean by that? Exploratory is really where you explore new opportunities, feelings, perceptions, maybe likes, dislikes. You have no clue what it is. So you're really going to explore it. Maybe you want to try and find a new market. So you explore a new market and how they live and their lifestyles. Descriptive is exactly what the word is saying. If you really want to understand who is your customer, then you're going to describe that customer in terms of their lifestyle, in terms of their demographics, their income, their behavior. Explanatory is really when you try to understand reasons behind. So there's a decline in sales. Now you try and understand and explain the decline in sales, or the change in market share, or the change in behavior. So you try and explain it. That's usually where you work with hypothesis. Causal is really to understand if something changes in the equation, what is the impact of that? An example that I think we all can relate to is if there is a price increase, if there is tomorrow, and I'm thinking it's happening, I think it happens next week again, a petrol increase. What is that petrol increase, the increase in that price, what is the change in behavior going to be? Are you going to try and join a lift club? Are you going to drive around less often and cut out unnecessary rides? Are you going to plan better? Are you going to sell your car and buy a smaller, more fuel-efficient car? Or is nothing going to change? Because it doesn't always mean things change. So that's the nature. Then, if that is the nature, where do you find your data? There are two sources, secondary and primary. Secondary means it's already out there, you just have to go and find it. Primary is you actually have to do some research. When you do some primary research and secondary research, the data can come in two formats. It can be quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative meaning that it's surveys. Qualitative, it's more of a narrative. And you can collect that data in two ways, either ad hoc or continuous. So ad hoc means you design a study, a research study, a survey with interviews, etc., and you do it, and that's done. You get your findings, you analyze it, you make recommendations, there are activities that you plan and you implement it. And you will probably never do that research again, or if you do something, it might be slightly similar but not exactly the same 5 years later, 3 years later, 10 years later, etc. Continuous means it's you track something over time. So you track sales over time. You track a certain behavior over time, month on month on month. You track people's views every month at a certain date. So it's the same thing that happens all the time. That is the mode of data collection. And the way you collect the data is through either interviewing or observation. So interviewing is physically where you're going to ask someone questions, and observation is where from a distance you look at their behavior, you observe, and you make notes. The research design, you must always have validity. It's internal and external validity. Internal is it must be credible, and it must provide you with answers to your research problem. On the external side is the ability to start generalizing. So you do research on people's behavior about the fuel petrol price increase. So now you can start generalize in terms of this is how they're going to behave when there is a petrol increase. So it's on the external side. And the types of when you have a research problem or opportunity, and it leads to research. It can be either consumer research, where you speak to your customers or consumers out there who are people who are using your product, but not using your product, or might use it in the near future, or they use a competitor's product, but it's individuals. It can be business to business. So it can be a business company that do research amongst other businesses. It can be advertising research, so it's about ad campaigns, or it can be international research, which means it's outside the borders of your company. And that will lead to 4 designs: cross-sectional, longitudinal, experimental, and a case study. And that was also asked in previous exams, the 4 designs, and to describe each of these designs. So what is cross-sectional? That is usually an ad hoc survey. So it means that at a certain point in time, you will collect data from a sample. And that will only happen once. If you do a similar study, it will be at a different point in time. It will be a different sample. There might be similar questions, but there might be different questions as well. You can do multiple cross-sectional, but that means that you do 2 or more samples, but each time the sample is different, and the information is obtained at a different time. So remember, when you do cross-sectional, it is ad hoc. You do the survey most of the times once off. So you can never measure change over time because it's a once-off survey. You cannot really use it to establish what is the effect on a relationship. What's the cause? If I change 1 or 2 things, what will the ultimate effect be? And you must also remember that when you do a cross-sectional study, it is only that topic, and you will only get answers to the things that you ask. So there are no other explanations. It is limited to what you ask. The next aspect is longitudinal, or like we refer to it in the real world as panel research. So it's a fixed sample, and you measured certain variables over time. So it's the same sample. The people remain the same over time. So if you do it every month or every 6 months, it's every 6 months, it's the same people that you ask the same questions to really track if there is change. It's really important to understand that these longitudinal and cross-sectional is different, because longitudinal you will really use to measure market trends over time to measure customer feedback or employment engagement. So you really want to test the same thing over time and time again amongst the same people. The next one is experimental or causal research. The most important thing here is that you usually have two groups. There's a test group and there's a control group with experimental research. The test group is where you change things. The control group is where nothing changed. So you have a set of variables. You're going to change the package of your product, and you want to see how it impacts on people's perception of the product. You want to see how it impacts on their behavior in terms of buying, etc. Their liking of the product, etc. So the test group is where you will change the package and you will test the impact on the behavior. The control group is where you don't change the package. It is the same thing, and you look at their behavior. And that is the most important aspect that you must remember. One variable you will change, and you will check what the effect of that variable is on the other variables. Then the last one is a case study. Now, a case study equals quite often academic world. It is very, very well known in the academic world. It is used a lot in the academic world. And the best way to describe it is you collect all the information so that you can get a real detailed picture, a detailed understanding of the situation in real life context. So it is not just one survey. You will maybe have conversations with industry experts. You will have conversations with decision makers internally. You will look at sales figures. You will look at customers. You will look at what competitors are doing. So it is a holistic analysis of a topic in the real life environment. So it's very important that you guys understand the differences between these four research designs. So yes, before we carry on with study unit 3, defining the research problem, any questions on study unit 1 or 2? If there are any questions, just quickly type them. In the meantime, I will just quickly show you what you need to know in study unit 3. Study unit 3 is about defining the research problem. So you need to know how to define the problem. You need to identify the nature of the research. You need to be able to formulate research objectives. You need to determine the units of analysis, what the time dimension is, in any other practicalities. Let's look. As I said before, research always starts with a problem and sometimes an opportunity. And that problem opportunity leads to the business problem statement. And from the business problem statement, you derive a research problem statement. The two are not the same. There is a significant difference between the two. The first step before you can get to the business problem is you need to understand the problem. You need to really make sure that everyone is in agreement that this is the problem. It sounds stupid, but if you have multiple parties in an organization that has an interest, they all might have their own ideas about what is the problem. So you really need to investigate it. Also, that will help you to develop your research objectives. If you really understand what your problem statements are, to develop your research objectives is going to be easy peasy. It will also guide you in terms of when you want to do secondary research and primary research, which are your two sources of data. So, the business problem is action orientated. The research problem is information orientated. This is the key difference between the two. And it was asked in the past. It was asked to really explain the differences between the two. And I'm sure you will still have questions about what's the difference between action and information. So, the business problem is, remember I said they find something that is problematic or opportunity. It is, and the business problem is action orientated. So it's really, what action must the business take to address the problem? Or what action must they take to take advantage of an opportunity? So it's what action do they need to take to address that problem or to take advantage of the opportunity? Where the research problem is, what information do they need to address the problem or to take advantage of the opportunity? Let's look at an example. Let's say the market research manager was asked to do research, or the business sits with the problem that they have noticed that over a year now, month on month, their sales figures have dropped. That's the problem. The sales figures have dropped and they need to address it. They need to stop that decrease. They have to stabilize it and ultimately change it so that it's on the increase again. So from a business perspective, if we just go back, they need to take action. So the business problem is, what action must the business take to first stop the decrease in sales, secondly, stabilize the sales figures, and thirdly, ultimately, change it to a significant increase of 10% over the next 3 years. That's the business problem. It's clearly they need action. From a research problem point of view, what information do they need to understand why did that sales figures drop month on month? Why is there a decrease? Once they understand the reasons for that, they can take action. So what information? The information is about understanding the reasons for the decrease in sales. And then they can take action, which is the business side. I hope that makes sense. So if you have the research problem, the research problem is usually driven by either you have to explore, you have to describe something, or you have to explain it. And from there, you develop your research objectives. What's research objectives? A problem statement is usually, you use your research problem statement as a guideline to develop your research objectives. It is and research objectives are really, what must the research tell you? What information do you need? And a guideline is that your research objectives always start with one of these type of words. Assess the situation, evaluate the level of service, understand the reasons, establish what are the main objections, develop an in-depth understanding, investigate, explore, measure. So your research objectives, you use your research problem to develop your research objectives, because if it is to, your research problem is you have to provide information in terms of the reasons behind the decrease in sales, then your research objective is probably going to be evaluate the product, evaluate the perceptions on pricing, understand the reasons for change in buying behavior, measure potential decrease in service, quality service that they received. Can you see how I take that research problem and translate it into objectives? Now, the units of research, units of analysis, it actually means who is your population, who that you're going to use for sampling, who are the people that you are going to contact to give you that information for the research problem. Who? Are they individuals, households, organizations, or businesses? And it's important that you understand the unit of analysis. And it's also important to remember that these unit of analysis have an impact on time, money, people, and skills. Why do I say that? It takes a lot more skilled people to, for instance, do interviews with CEOs of businesses. It might take a lot of time to interview 4 people in a household. It might take a lot of time and money and skills to maybe do interviews countrywide with individuals from the big cities to the smallest little rural town. So it's really important that you understand who are your units of analysis. Now, once you've done all this pre-work, you're now at the point where you know what the business problem is, you know what your research problem is, you know what your objectives, the research objectives are going to be. Now you have to write a research brief. Now you will see I have 5 stars there. It means that they, in the last 3 exams, in each and every exam paper, they gave you a scenario, a case study, and then they've asked you questions about what are the elements, the main topics that you need to cover in a research brief, and they've also asked you to write a research brief. So this is based on what happened previously. This is a very important study unit in your learner guide. Like I said, I'm not too sure what they're going to ask in this exam. I can only base it on what's happened previously, and it was really covered in all 3 exams previously. So you need to understand how to write a brief. You need to understand that there's a relationship between a brief and a proposal. You have to understand the roles that people are playing in this whole process, and then you need to know how to choose a supplier. So let's start with the first. What is a research brief? Sometimes people do a verbal research brief. It is not ideal. A research brief should be a formal document. It should be written because that is the record of what you as the research buyer requires from a research agency. The research agency can also use it as a reference document for future purposes. And it's also very useful when you get to the end of your project to see if you really met the requirements of the research brief. When you review the project to understand whether your project was successful or not, you go back to your research brief. What was your requirements? What were the requirements? And did you meet them? So, like I said, before you can start with the brief, you really need to know what the business problem is or the opportunity is. You need to know what actions the business want to take. What is required of them? Remember, it links back to the business problem. It's action-oriented. What information do they need? How will the research help them? What objectives must the research cover? And how much time and money is available? And this last point is actually very important because if you only have 2 weeks available, it can have a serious impact on the money, how much a research project costs. If you have limited funds, it has an impact on your methodology. It, for instance, has an impact on your sample sizes. So that last point is very important. I'm just quickly going to pour some water for me. The key elements, the building blocks of a research brief. You have to start with the title. What is this research project about? It's the decline in sales. It is testing the new television campaign for a certain product. It is testing a new product concept. It is testing consumer behavior. It's measuring customer satisfaction. Your project has a title. You start with the title. That is number one. And I find quite often that that's one of the things that people leave out. It's like 1 or 2 points already down the drain. So please make sure that you always have a title. It's actually an easy mark or two that you can score. The second one is the definition of the problem. What is your business problem? What is your research problem? Any background information to that problem. You cannot just stop with the definition of the problem. You have to provide more information. So let's go back to our example of a decline in sales over here. What was the sales when you started to notice the decline? Did it drop significantly? Did it gain momentum over time? Is it a small percentage every month, but now after a year it is a significant drop? Were there 1 or 2 months where there was an increase? What is your sales target? Did you already implement any corrective measures? Did you have an ad campaign? Was there any impact of that? Haven't you done anything? What is your current strategy for sales? Who are your competitors? What does their products look like? What did they do in terms of marketing? The pricing, the product benefits. Did they also experience a decrease in sales? Maybe there are external aspects that has an impact on the decline in sales. Maybe the economic situation, the increase in interest rates. So really you have to unpack everything, all the knowledge that you already know, you have to cover in this background to the problem. Then why is the research necessary? Why do they want to do this research? Brings back to your business problem again, and your research problem. Then your research objectives, like I said, your research objective is what are you going to get out of this research, and how, and by when. And you start with the specific wording like measure, investigate, analyze, discuss. How is this information going to be used? Like to implement corrective measures to change this decrease in sales. Who is the target population? Who are the people that are using the product? Who are the people with the service? Who are the people that are buying it? How would you describe them in terms of where are they geographically situated? Are they male, female? How old are they? Are they in a certain income group? Are they in metropolitan areas, or do they live in the rural areas? Do they have a specific educational level? What is their marital status? So really you need to describe your target population in terms of everything that is important to this specific target and product. Then you have to give the research agency an idea of what kind of approach would you like to see. The type of approach, like I said, can be qualitative, quantitative, or combination. And it's really you give your view on why would you like to see qualitative and your reason for it, or a combination of the two and your reason for it. So don't just give your approach that you prefer. Give them a reason, motivate. Why would you like to see this kind of approach? Then any analysis. Do you have any specific analysis that you require? Maybe you want to compare male versus female with each other. Maybe you want to do a segmentation. Um, there are various statistical models that you can use. So really, is there anything specific? Maybe you want to compare your customers' views with that of your competitors, or people that use your product and people that have never used your product, or people that have closed an account with you recently. So really make sure what type of analysis do you want, and make sure that you really give them all the detail. The output. It's really when the research house does research and they manage this whole project, in the end, they analyze the data and there are some findings. In what format would you like to see it? Because there are many ways to skin a cat here. You could ask for a detailed written report. You can ask for a PowerPoint presentation. You can ask No, it's okay. It's not on. Okay, so now I can start it. Okay. Hi everyone, we're back online again. So just close that. You can just okay, so we're back on. We have the brilliant Genevieve, who always helps us in a moment of despair. Thank you, Genevieve. We really, really appreciate it. So I am back. Okay, so yes, the last time that we spoke, we talked about the outputs, where you really have to tell the research house in your briefing exactly what it is, what are the outputs. Then liaison arrangements, also very important. The research supplier needs to know who can they contact in the organization if they have questions, if there are concerns, they want to give an update, etc. So they need to know who's their contact, what are the details, and also how can they contact the person. Do we have problems again? Okay, seems like we're fine. Okay, so you have to tell them who's the contact person, what is the contact details, and what type of contact the person prefers. Maybe emails, etc. What's the timing of the research? What is the date that you want the research? When? By when do you want it? And what is your budget? Because they need to know the parameters that they need to work in. And obviously, the objective is you give them a brief. They're going to come back with a proposal. In what format do you want the proposal? In a Word document, in PowerPoint presentation, a combination of both? Must they just email it? Do you want actual physical paper copies? Do you need them to present it? By when do you want the proposal? So please be very specific. And then lastly, your selection criteria. What are the things that you're going to use to evaluate the proposal and to select a company? So yes, the outcome of a briefing document is usually it ends up with a briefing session with the research. What's the difference between outputs and format? Okay, let's just go back. Thank you for that. The outputs is in what the outputs is based on your research findings. So when the research agency has conducted the research, they've analyzed the data and they now have findings. What outputs do you want? Do you want a presentation? Do you want a report? Do you want a combination of that? Do you also want maybe a data set where you can do your own analysis? Where number 14, the format is more in what format do you want a proposal? Remember, you write a brief. You share the briefing document with the research agency. The agency have to come back with a proposal. But in what format do you want that proposal? Do you want it in a PowerPoint presentation, a Word document, a combination electronically, paper? Which is different because your output is in what format do you want your research findings. Does that make sense, Ellie? Great. So yes, and the research proposal is really, it's a plan that the research company puts together with ideas of how the research should be conducted. And in that plan, there are details about the who will do it, the what they will do, the where they will do it, the when, and the how, and all the other informations and costs that's associated with that research project. Now, quite often when you write a briefing document, you end up briefing more than one research agency. And when you get your proposal, remember I said you must tell them how are you going to select a research agency, especially when you have more than one research agent. You have to be very, very clear to them in terms of how you're going to evaluate the proposals and ultimately why you're going to give a certain agency the contract. Now, there are two components to it. There is specifics that you use to select the supplier, and then the more general stuff. And this was asked previously as well. First, on the specific stuff is, do they show in their proposal that they really understand your business? That they have an understanding that if they maybe don't know it, that they've done some reading, that they've gained some knowledge about your business, that they understand the business problem and the research problem linked to it. Do they have specific experience in the industry or on that subject? Maybe not in the motor industry, but maybe they have experience on service quality measurements. They're experts in that. What services do they offer? What other available expertise do they have? Will they give access to? Are they innovative? Will they look for different ways to find the solutions to your research problem? Do they apply techniques, models, or is it just straightforward research? Do they have international connections, global exposure? Can they use them as soundboards, their international connections? Can they look at what was done globally before? Always, cost and budget and timing will always be part of the criteria that you will use. And then you can also look at the research agency's availability of resources, how skilled they are. But then there are more general things. How big is the company? And here you have to understand that there are many research companies. Some of them are smaller and will subcontract parts of the research project. So they, for instance, will subcontract the interviewing to another company because they don't have their own interviewers. They will subcontract the data capturing to another company because they don't have their own data capturing. Or they will subcontract the PowerPoint presentation to another company. So you really have to understand how big is the company. Will they do everything themselves? Are they going to subcontract? Who are they going to subcontract to? Will your project get the dedicated, focused attention? Will you get the required attention that you need? Or will you just be one of many clients and you have to scream and shout and kick to get your research project off the ground, etc.? Will you have access to senior people? What's your recourse if you're not happy with something? Who will you have access to? Or will you have access to people who can make decisions, who can make a call? Or do you have to go to a junior person who will have to refer it to her boss, who will have to refer it to her boss before they can make a decision? What is your access within the organization? The staff. How many people will work on your project? How qualified are they? What's their experience? Usually, at the end of a proposal, they will put a small write-up on each person in that project team. So they will say the research director, so-and-so, this is their qualifications, this is their experience, and this will be the role in this research project. Then the research manager, there's the research executive, there's the research admin person, depending on how big the team is. It will give you a very good idea if you're not familiar with the research supplier, what sort of experience the staff have that will work on your project, how many and how qualified. And then, as I said, the members' affiliation to any governing bodies. Because will you ultimately have recourse if something goes wrong? Will you have the insurance that they will follow the right protocol, adhere to the highest standards possible when they conduct your research project? So these are the things that you will really use to evaluate a research proposal and the research agency with it, and that you will use to ultimately award the research contract to. Okay, remember we said your data, you can do secondary research or primary research or combination of the two. So what is secondary research? Secondary research is information that's already out there in the market. Where primary research means the information is not available at all. You have to actually go and do a research project to find the information. Just going to go back. And in the academic world, we all know literature reviews. A literature review is nothing but secondary research. It's actually someone sitting behind their desk and look for reports on that topic that will give background information, databases that are available, do web searches, look for in the company, in their archives, for maybe historical research, case studies. And they will usually work through that to understand. Ellie, are you okay? Okay, Cora's fine. Okay, great. I'm just checking. Okay, so really secondary research is already out there. And you will do secondary research to really get to grips with the problem, the research problem, all that background information. And once you have that, you will be able to make an informed decision whether there's sufficient information out there to not do a primary research or to actually do primary research. Your primary research is then actual research after you've done your desk research. So really, when you've done your secondary research in detail, you might find that there's no need for primary research. You can actually answer the business problem and they will be able to take action. Or if not that the case, it will then really give you an in-depth understanding of the business problem. And you will then easily be able to define your research problem. And if it's necessary to develop a hypothesis, you will be able to do that. You will also be in a far better informed position to decide what nature of information is required. And you can then decide how to formulate a very effective research design. And also you have a better idea of what questions to ask, what not to ask. And once you get at the end of your research project where you now sit with data and findings, you also have more information to make sense of your findings because you already have done so much background information that you now already have a basic understanding of the problem, and therefore your data will quite often make a lot more sense and it will give you a lot more context in terms of the findings. So secondary research is very, very important aspect in the whole research process. For me, it's almost like the foundation. What now? Okay, there it is. So how do you conduct secondary research? It's really, first of all, you have to understand what information are you going to look for. You can't just start and search. You have to plan it because you can run around in circles forever. So you really have to plan it and identify exactly what kind of information are you going to look for. Then secondly, what are the potential sources that you're going to use and how you're going to get access to it. Now, while we're talking here, the potential sources, there are various potential sources and it totally depends on the type of information that you're looking for. internally in the company, there's always already existing information. What information is there that you can use? Maybe market share reports, maybe previous research, maybe customer profiles, maybe your company has a customer database with behavior. So there will be internal information. External, you can go and look for syndicated surveys. And syndicated surveys means it's 4 or 5 companies that do a research project together. So instead of one motor manufacturing company paying R1 million for the research, 10 motor manufacturers pull together, do one survey, and each of them will pay R100,000, and everyone will have access to the same data. You can also look at pool data. Pool data, for instance, one of the sources in South Africa is bank data. Once a month, all the banks have to submit their data, their product sales data to the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank then combines it and compile one big report. So it's pool data. There's government data like census statistics, other surveys that are usually conducted by the government. Then you get publications, and then you get your online sources. So you can see, you can start running around in circles and search forever. So I would recommend that you spend a bit of time up front to sit and identify which potential information sources can assist you with the type of information that you're looking for. And if you don't have access to it, how are you going to gain access, if it is possible to gain access? Then the third step in it is you have to evaluate the suitability of each of these information sources. Is it suitable? Is it an academic source? Or is it a Wikipedia or, I don't know, a Huisgenoot magazine or whatever? So evaluate it, make sure it is an academic source. It's a reliable source. Then you have to evaluate the quality of the information. Because not all information out there is of good quality and is usable. There's a lot of anecdotes or people that have a view that's not substantiated at all. It's just their view. So be very aware of what you use and make sure that it's quality. The next point is quite important. And that is keep a log of all your sources and your searches. And I just recently did a very big project for companies doing business in Africa. And I spent a lot of time online. And I made the mistake of spending 3 days online searching for information without keeping a log. And I had to go back and double check, because you search on words and then you're not too sure whether this was a source that you've already covered, and then you have to read through it, and then halfway through it I realized, oh man, I've been there, done it, etc. Then, once you have searched for the information, you now have to analyze it and you have to learn from it. What are the findings from that search? And then you have to summarize it. And then you have to apply it. You have to use those findings. And lastly, don't forget, when you do secondary research, keep a referencing log. Because you use other sources, not your own, for this. So yes, secondary research, the aim is to find out what you already know about the topic, what are the views about the topic, what someone else's views on this topic, how does it fit in with what you want to do, and is it worth it to conduct additional research. And you must make sure that when you do secondary research, that you at least try and find 4 to 6 different authors, different sources, and they must be academic. And if it's older than 10 years, don't discard it. It's things changing so drastically that it's almost not going to be worth your while. Now, in my years of research, we never used research that was older than 5 years. And if it was anything to do with technology, we never used research that was older than 3 years, because we just found that in the technology IT space, things change so drastically that 3 years and older were totally outdated. But in the academic world, they will accept sources and information up to 10 years old. Avoid plagiarism. Please make sure that you don't copy and paste directly. It is a serious offense. Remember, you're doing secondary research, so you don't use direct quotes from that source. You don't also, when you have 10, 20 different articles that you're working through, reports, etc., you don't discuss each of them in isolation. You will have to discuss the findings overall, collated together from all the different articles or publications. That's very important. And as I mentioned on the previous page, number 3 and number 4, the suitability and the quality is very important. How do you judge whether it's quality information? First of all, who commissioned it? If there's research that was conducted, who did it? Who commissioned it? Who requested it? And who did the research? What was the reason for the research? What was the objectives? Why did they do it? Where did you find this information? Is it a credible source? When was it done? How old is it? What methodology did they use? Is it a credible, robust methodology, proper sample design, proper methodology? What quality controls did they have in place when they did this research? So that's very important to keep in mind when you do your secondary research and when you look at all these information sources. Okay, now this brings us to primary research. And like I said, there is qualitative research and there's quantitative research. Let's just look at qualitative research first. And this was also asked in previous, one of the previous exam papers, is to define qualitative and quantitative research and to describe the differences between them. Now, what I find is that the word, the terminology, qualitative and quantitative, is actually very close to each other. And people have the right intention of maybe using qualitative, but they use the word quantitative because the two words are so close. So here's your guideline. Qualitative has an L in it. It means that it's about language. It is small samples because here you don't look at numbers. You look at what people are telling you, the anecdotes. So it is what you see, hear, experience. It's the L. It is language. So it's really people share with you their experiences. They talk about their emotions, their feelings, their personal experiences. And they can quite often give you detailed explanations, stories, or an in-depth account or feedback of how they felt, how they experienced it, what they did. So it's very rich feedback, but rich in terms of wording, the words that they use. There are no numbers in qualitative. So it's really an in-depth understanding about people's lives, their stories, experiences. And the easy way to remember it, qualitative L equals language. The qualitative methodology is about focus groups and in-depth interviews. Now, the most used ones are your normal focus groups, mini focus groups, online focus groups, and in-depth interviews. The differences. Focus groups are really, it is about 8 to 12 people sitting around a table. There is a facilitator that will ask them questions about a topic and they will talk about it. There is no structured questionnaire. It is, we call it a discussion guide. So there are topics that the facilitator need to cover during that session. Make sure that they talk about it. But it's no fixed now question 1, now question 2. No, it's very flexible. And usually with focus groups, you have between 8 and 12 people. If it's more than 12 people in a focus group, it becomes difficult to manage because people want all talk. They want to talk at the same time. They want to share their feelings, and it's really difficult to make sure that everyone can give their open and honest view and make sure that everyone has a turn to speak up. Mini focus groups is usually around 4 to 6 people. It's still the same format of a focus group, but there are fewer people in that focus group. And it's quite often, if you conduct a focus group and it is with people that you really battle to get hold of and it's difficult to get them to attend a focus group, or it is a very sensitive topic and you really want to probe in depth, so you don't want too many views. Now, with focus groups and mini focus groups, the facilitator plays an enormous role because they must make sure that everyone gets a turn to give their views, that someone doesn't overrule other views, that they don't influence other people's views, that everyone participates. Sometimes people are shy, so they must make sure that everyone gets a turn to speak. They must make sure that everything in the discussion guide is covered within a set time period. Now, if you look at the textbooks that say focus groups, you can do 2.5 hours. My experience is from an hour and a half, it starts becoming difficult. People getting tired. They're really getting tired. And they start giving you the same answers over and over. But you can still push it to 2 hours. My personal view is 2.5 hours is way too long. Online focus groups is exactly the same as a physical focus group where people sit around a table or in a room, but it's online. So there are 10, 12 or 20 people or 50 people that participate in a conversation. So your facilitator will type a question, an open-ended question, and people will type their feedback, and then the facilitator will look at their feedback and ask another question to get a better understanding. So it happens online, and it usually happens 24/7 over 3 days. So you will usually, with online focus groups, have 3 or 4 facilitators. So for 3 days, 24/7, 24 hours, for 3 days, you will have facilitators that watch what people are saying and make sure that the conversation keeps going and that they probe for when there's no understanding of a specific view or answer, or type in a new question to ensure that the conversation keeps going. In-depth interviews is a one-on-one. It is not the same as a personal interview. It is qualitative. So there is one person, a facilitator, and a respondent. But there's no fixed questionnaire with question 1, question 2, question 3, yes, no rating scales. It is still a conversation. There's just a guideline. And in-depth interviews is usually with people that are very busy, time poor. You have to make an appointment with them. So it will be at a time and place of their convenience. And it's usually for a short time or period. So your facilitator needs to be well trained, totally qualified to conduct an interview like that, to ensure that everything is covered within a short time period. You can push it up to an hour, but I found with very busy people, they're usually not prepared to give you more than half an hour out of their daily schedule. So just keep that in mind. But there are more methods in terms of qualitative. These ones are still very, very relevant. It's not used that often. So the first is the workshop panel discussion type focus groups. So it's a workshop where you have 20 people and for 3-4 hours you workshop a topic, or a panel that will come back after a session that will come back tomorrow and the day on thereafter and a month later again. So it's the same people, but they come back. Or you can have extended focus groups where the people know that today we're going to have a 2-hour focus group and tomorrow we're going to have another one. Family and friends. So it can be a focus group with a group of friends or with a family group. Semiotics is about language. It's about signs. So this is not so much about the wording, but what gestures, body language, signs do people use. And then there's observations. Observations is really where someone from a distance observe people's behavior, their facial expressions. But maybe when someone is in a shop, how do they shop? Do they look at the top of, only at the top of the shelf? Do they go right down to the bottom? How long do they spend in each aisle? So it gets observed of what they do. And observations, people can be aware of it or they can be unaware of it. There are still lots of questions on how ethical the unaware observations are. And then lastly, in the less popular qualitative methods are your in-depth interviews with pairs, so it's 2 people, or triads where it's 3 people, or a family. So it's also if you make an appointment and you will see the family of 4 or 5 for half an hour at a time in a place that's of their convenience. Now, the sample size in qualitative is not straightforward because there's not a formula that you can use. Your starting point is usually 30 people. Now, what do I mean by 30? Do I mean 30 focus groups? Do I mean 30 in-depth interviews? I mean in total 30 respondents. So if you do mini groups and you have 5 in a mini group, I would suggest that you need to consider 6 mini groups. If you do proper focus groups and there are 10 in a focus group, you can consider 3. In-depth interviews, you need to work it out depending on the target market. But you have to also keep in mind whether you have different customer segments. What do I mean by this? I mean that, say for instance, you conduct a survey amongst certain age groups. You cannot put 18 to 25-year-olds and 65-year-olds in the same focus group and then say you just conduct 3 focus groups, because those 2 age groups don't understand each other. Their experiences, their attitudes, their behavior is totally different. So they're not going to talk the same language in the focus group. So maybe you need to do then 2 students and 2 seniors and end up with 40 people. You also need to consider language. If people that participate in qualitative research, they talk a lot, so they need to be comfortable in this language. So in South Africa, we have 11 language groups. So if it's important to get the views of different language groups, you can't just do 3 focus groups of 10 in a group. You then have to consider at least 11 language focus groups for each language. Geographical differences. If it's important to understand the difference between Joburg, Durban, Cape Town, and Bloemfontein in South Africa, then you need to take that into consideration and work out your number of groups or in-depth interviews accordingly. There is a sort of a guideline. Watch out for the saturation point. What do I mean by saturation point? Don't do 20 focus groups because you're concerned that you not have enough people covered in your qualitative. Because after 5 or 6 focus groups, you might just find that every focus group you will get the same findings, the same feedback. There's nothing new. It's just the same thing over and over, which means you have reached a saturation point. So there's no need for doing further focus groups because you're just going to confirm what you already got from the previous. So be aware of your saturation point. The other one tip is never just do one focus group. Never ever. That will never work. You need at least another group, a backup, to make sure that what was said in the first group is also relevant in the second group. So that is very important to remember in terms of the design around qualitative. Okay, so now we get to quantitative. This is now surveys. N stands for numbers. This is the best way you can ever remember what quantitative is. It is about samples. It's large numbers. You will analyze the data according to percentages, to stats. You will use graphs to explain it. There will be very limited emotions. The emotions will be according to a scale of agree or disagree or like or dislike, but not really in-depth feelings. I felt so sad because of these and these reasons. So it is very much about the numbers and large samples. With quantitative, you use a questionnaire. It is structured. There's a question 1, a question 2, a question 3, etc. And there is a very specific question. It's not a guideline. That question must be asked. If there's an interviewer, the interviewer has to ask that question word for word as it is in that questionnaire. If it's a self-completion, that person reads the question and then they answer it. Just remember also with quantitative, there's a questionnaire and the questionnaire gets asked by an interviewer. The interviewer goes through all the questions and asks the questions, or someone answers it on their own. So it's a self-completion. They sit on their own and they answer each question. And the interviewer in quantitative is also very, very important. An interviewer needs proper training, and before you conduct a survey, you need to brief the interviewer. Why are you doing this survey? Who is the target market? How do they approach it? How should they ask the questions? Explain the questions to them. It is a very, very important role because your interviewer is the contact with the respondent, the participant in the research. That interviewer needs to convince that participant to participate. They need to make sure that they're honest and true in their answers. They need to clarify any concerns, questions that participant has. They have to observe whether it's quality information or whether this person is talking rubbish. But in that whole process, they still need to be very unbiased. They're not allowed to influence the participant in terms of their questioning, in terms of their answering. And they should also make sure that it's a uniform approach. They cannot in a one interview ask the question this way, and then in the next question, with the next interview, they ask the question in a different way, or swap the order. It needs to be in a very uniformed way. So the interviewer is critical in the success of quantitative research. The different methodologies is really their personal interviews, And with personal interviews, I mean, there's an interviewer that will ask someone else a question face to face. That includes the intercepts in malls when people walk out of the shop, etc., with someone just approach you with the clipboard and ask you if they can ask you a few questions. So it's personal. There's an interviewer, and face to face, they will ask someone else the questions and complete it on the questionnaire. Then there's telephonic interviews, where it happens, the interview happens over the telephone. And here we can also include SMS in surveys. Then you have mail, where you post through the postal network a questionnaire to someone, and then you cross your fingers and hope that they complete it and mail it back to you. Then there are online surveys, where it is on an electronic survey that gets sent to someone, they complete it, they submit and they send it back, in terms of emails, or where it is just online, you're on a web and you a web page and you answer questions. Now, each of these methods have advantages and disadvantages. And it is important that you understand the advantages and the disadvantages for each of these methods, because that is how you decide which method is the best for your approach. Now, the criteria that you use is the speed of data collection. If you need answers within a day, you will not be able to do a mail survey because it goes through the postal network. It takes time to get delivered. Then you're dependent on someone to complete it and mail it back. Maybe a telephonic interview will be better. So look at the speed of data collection. Geographical flexibility. People in rural areas might not have access to internet. Therefore, web-based interviews is not going to work, or cell phone connection is very bad, so SMS survey is not going to work. So look at that. The cooperation of the respondent to get them to participate in the research. If that's very important, then a mailing survey is not going to work because you cannot really convince them. There's not an opportunity to talk to them and try and convince them that it's in the best interest of a lot of people if they participate. The versatility of the questions. Some questions you just cannot ask over the phone. You need to ask personally. The length of the questionnaire. If it's half an hour questionnaire or an hour, a telephone interview is not going to work because that person can very subtly just put the phone down, and you will have no control. If it's a 20-page questionnaire, it doesn't help that you mail it to someone through the mail system because they're not going to complete it. Even for online, if it's a 20-page questionnaire, they'll look at it and they will skip it or they will bail at some stage. Non-responses. How important is it that you have control over the answers at every question? Then maybe a personal interview is the best option because then you can control it. Potential to answer the question incorrectly or misunderstand the question. Is it a question that you need to explain? Is there explanation on how to complete it? Then maybe a personal interview is the best. The influence of the interviewer. How important is that? Supervision of the interviewers. Anonymity of respondents. Your ability to follow up. If you need to contact that respondent in a week's time again, more intercept interview is not going to do it because the chances are 99% you're not going to find the same person. Cost. Personal interviews are extremely expensive, where telephonic or mail questionnaire or online questionnaire is a lot cheaper. The use of visual material. If you need to show someone a TV ad. You cannot do it via the phone. So these are the things that you need to consider when you recommend a specific approach. Now, in terms of the exams, you will get what they've done in the past is they've given you a scenario, a case study. Then they said, in terms of your quantitative methodology, which one of these would you recommend? And then give us the reasons why. So you will then go and you will Okay, we're back. I really apologize. It seems like there is a network problem that is totally out of our control, and I'm sure you find it extremely frustrating. I apologize. Um, I wish there was something I could do, but unfortunately, there's not much we can do. Okay, so just in terms of there are also survey types that are less used. Um, your panel survey, we've discussed it where you have a number of people on a panel and regularly you go back to the same people asking them the same questions. Oh, okay. So we have the panel surveys, then we have omnibus surveys. It is really where a research agency do a survey and you buy 2 questions or 3 questions in that survey You pay only for those 3 questions, and your company gets the data. You don't have access to any of the other questions in that survey. Online research communities, we've discussed it, and then observations, where mystery shopper is a perfect example also of mystery of observation, where you go in and you do some shopping and you observe how the staff react and how they treat you. And then also eye tracking, for instance, looking at people's eyes as they watch an ad or they search online, where they go, etc. Study Unit 8 is sampling. I'm just going to start pushing because I can see we're running out of time, and I'm really sorry about this. Sampling starts with the target market. Who is your target population? And it allows ultimately researchers to make informed decisions based on a number of people's feedback, limited group of feedback. So you really have to think about who do you want to include or exclude from your research. What are the type of information that you need from them? And there are 2 types of sampling techniques: random sampling or probability, as we know it, and then purpose or non-probability. What does it mean? Your random sampling, I'm going to use the term random, but it's also probability. It's just in the real world, most of the times we talk about random. It means that each unit, what do I mean by unit? Remember earlier I talked about a unit is either individual, family, or business. So each unit has a known probability or chance of being selected. You know that that is the chance that they have of being selected for the sample. Where in a purpose or non-probability sampling, you don't know what the chance is of being selected. And an example is for non-probability. Quite often that's what you find with qualitative, and random probability, quantitative. But it's not exclusive for those 2. That's just qualitative surveys tend to be more non-probability, where quantitative tend to be more probability. But please, it's not exclusive for those 2. So remember, your sampling is always influenced by the cost. How much money do you have available? How much time do you have available? Industry standards and statistical precision. Now, the industry standard rule of thumb, that's usually not in a textbook. But here are a few tips. The industry standard, for instance, is you will never do a quantitative survey with less than 100 people. That is it. If you do advertising research, you usually include between 200 and 300 people in your survey, and that's your sample size. Those are sort of industry standards. It is not the perfect sampling formula that you use. Another standard is, if I do a sample of 100, which is industry standard, but I want to analyze it according to 3 age groups. It means that if I analyze all my questions according to 3 age groups, my sample cannot be 100, because the one age group might be 30 people, the next one might be 40 people, and the next one might be 30 people, again, small basis. If you need to analyze it by those 3 groups, you need at least 50 responses within each age group, so your sample has to be bigger. Those are some rule of thumbs, industry standards that you have to keep in mind. And then the statistical precision. How important is that? Now, if you look at that, there are 4 elements for sample sizing. It is, how big is the actual population, if you know that. So if we talk about 18-year-olds in South Africa, we can probably look at our census data and say there are 2 million 18-year-olds in South Africa. We know the population size. Then, margin of error. How much error will you allow? Now, why do we work with margin of error? It is a survey. It is not a census. So it will never be 100% perfect. So there will always be a margin of error. And I will explain to you what margin of error is just now. Then there is a level of confidence, and then there is a standard deviation. Here is the story. There's the formula. I'm not even going to work through that formula because these days that formula is not so important, because you will find, if you Google it, you will find sample calculators. But just in terms of this little table that I have here, to find out what my sample size must be, let's say we say the population size is 10,000 people. We know there are 10,000 people. We want confidence of 95%. So we want to be 95% confident that our findings will be right. So we work on this column. Now we say margin of error. We're happy to work with a 1% margin of error. What do I mean by 1% margin of error? It means that if my findings, if I say 90% likes this product, my margin of error is 1%. It means it can be 91%, 1% more, or it can be 89%, 1% less. Therefore, we never really work with margins of error of more than 5%. And the confidence levels, the two confidence levels that are used most often are 95% and 99%. So go back to our example. Population size is 1,000. We work with a 95% confidence level, which is our first column. 1% margin of error. So we go down in the column, 1% margin of error. So we see, oh, if we want to work with the 95% confidence level, 1% margin of error, and our population is 10,000 people, we need 4,899 people in our sample. So that's one of the ways of calculating sample sizes. I hope that helps you guys in terms of understanding your sample size. Now, probability and non-probability. If life was just as simple to say, yeah, there's just probability and there's non-probability. But there are different types of probability. Simple random, systematic, stratified, and cluster. Simple random is just there are 1,000 people. I need to interview 100 people. I spin my bottle and it ends up of number 20, and from there onwards I calculate every 20th person and I go round and round and round till I have 100 people in my sample. Systematic is I decide up front that I want to interview 100 people, and from my sample I'm going to select every 10th person. Stratified is where you up front already decide that you want to interview a specific stratified. So you want people that meet specific criteria. So you stratified it already up front. So you want to interview a random sample of females and a random sample of males. Or you want to interview a random sample of single people, a random sample of married people with children, random sample of married people without children, and a random sample of widowers. So up front you stratified it already. Clustering is where you group a natural number of people together based on the area that they live, a community. So you will say suburb 1, suburb 2, suburb 3, or province 1, province 2, province 3. So that's probability. Non-probability, there are also four. There's convenience sampling, judgment, snowball, and quota. Quota is where I upfront decide I want to interview 50 males and 50 females. That's quota. Snowball is where I will interview someone and then I will ask them, who else do you think I need to interview? Judgment is where I would say they need to all have cell phones. So already up front, I group them together. So these are the four different techniques in terms of non-probability. Part of the whole quantitative is your questionnaire. And it's very important questionnaire design. And there are some things that you have to consider. Number one is your questions must be aligned with your business and research problems and your research objectives. Number two, that you must consider your target market when you develop your questionnaire. And number three, your questions must adhere to sound questionnaire design principles. Now, I'm going to discuss each of them. To check that your questions are aligned with the business and research problems and the research objectives, people might think it's stupid, but it's the best way. You take your proposal. In your proposal, you have your business problems and your research objectives. You take your questionnaire and you take different colors of highlighters. So you take your yellow highlighter, you say objective 1 is green, and you go through your questionnaire and you highlight all the questions in green that answer objective 1. Objective 2 is blue, you highlight, and that way you can ensure that the questions in the questionnaire address the objectives, that each objective is covered in your questionnaire. Because if you have a pink objective and there are no pink questions, then that objective is not covered in your questionnaire. If you have covered all your objectives and there are questions with no coloring, you have to ask why you're asking those questions. What do they have to do with the research problem and the research objectives if you didn't highlight them? So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is your target market. Things that you here have to consider is the age. If it's kiddies, it cannot be a self-completion. You cannot use big words. You will probably maybe use smiley faces. Literacy, the same. If you have to make sure that people can understand the language. The level of education, if you use very complicated terminology that people might not understand. Also different demographics. An example here is I recently I had to evaluate a questionnaire for a survey that they conducted in Lesotho, and it was aimed at the business market. But the questions in the people that had to answer the questionnaire was from the street vendor who sells his fruit on the street corner to the big CEO of a corporate. And they asked him the same questions. Some of those questions the vendor on the street corner would not be able to answer because they had no clue what it was. And some of those questions you could not answer a business owner because you're wasting his time. It's not part of his work. So you need to, and my suggestion in the end to them was, you need 2 questionnaires depending on who the participant is. The knowledge of terminology. Do they actually know what you mean if you use that terminology? So take your target market into consideration. Now, number 3 is the principles of questionnaire design. Remember, your questionnaire will always have an introduction. Who is conducting the research? Which research agency? If there's an interviewer involved, who is the interviewer? What is the research about? What's the topic about? What's expected from the respondent? Must they answer questions? Must they, that's asked by an interviewer, do they have to complete it themselves? How long will it take them to complete it? Is it confidential? And then if the sponsor gives you the go-ahead, also tells them who is the company that requested the research. The second aspect is the questions to verify the target market. Usually, if your target market needs to meet specific criteria, that you have to make sure that they earn a certain income. You have to then ask in the beginning of the questionnaire that question, because you cannot go through the whole questionnaire and then at the end you realize it's actually the wrong person that you interviewed. You wasted the company's money, you've wasted your time, your money, and you wasted the respondent's time and energy. So if there is qualifying criteria that the participant or respondent needs to meet, you have to ask them pretty early in the question. Then you have to check the flow and the order of your questions. You always start your questionnaire with more generic, non-sensitive questions, like an introduction to the topic, easy to answer questions. And then there is the middle part of the questionnaire. That is what it's about. Those questions you have to ask, because that is the reason why you're doing the survey. And then there's the end, where you usually end off with sensitive questions. Why? Because through this introduction questions and then the important questions, you now have gained some trust. The respondent and participant is more at ease. They are starting to trust you. They realize it's not a serious thing. So if you have sensitive questions to ask, they will be more likely to answer it then, because they're more comfortable now with the whole process. And then you need to end off the questionnaire with some more generic questions and a thank you. You always thank your respondent or participant for their time at the end. Then you need to be very clear what you want. You need to be very specific. So it is a question like, what's your monthly income? Okay, monthly income. Is that my salary that gets paid into my account? Or is that my salary before any deductions? Or is that my salary plus the value of the cell phone and the petrol card that I get from my company? Be very, very specific. What is it that you want to get from this question? Number 5, avoid ambiguous wording. Sometimes, seldom, rarely. Really, what does it mean? I mean, for me, those 3 words actually mean exactly the same. But I'm sure all of you guys will have different interpretations of what those words mean. So you avoid those words. Quite often, even in response categories, people will say, how often do you buy fast food? Often, seldom, sometimes, rarely, never. I'm telling you that when you analyze that information, you're going to give your interpretation of seldom, sometimes, really, never, and not the participants. So you cannot use wording like that. Avoid long lists of responses. So if you ask a person, like, choose which countries you would like to visit, and you give them a list of 100 different companies, it's going to take them ages, and they're going to end up just ticking some just to make you happy. If you have questions with numeric ranges, make sure that they're clear and they're mutually exclusive. Look at the example. Up to 10 years, 11 to 20, 20 to 30. If I'm 20 years old Which category am I now going to tick? 11 to 20 or 20 to 30? So you confuse the participant and your data will not be 100% correct. So it must be mutually exclusive. Ensure that if you use scales, that they are balanced, that they are an equal number of positives and an equal number of negatives. Look at the example. Extremely unhappy, very unhappy, unhappy and happy. There are more unhappy options and only one. So the chances are that you will get that your answers will skew towards unhappy because you give them so few options of being happy. You almost like force them to be unhappy. Avoid leading questions. You do disagree. You sort of assume that this person disagrees. Or very emotional language. Should you even pay more? No one wants to pay more. Now you even use more expressive language, even pay more. So now it's definitely not going to be a yes or a no, depending on how the question went on further. So avoid that emotional language. Make sure that your questions are covered and it's only a single topic. Please rate the staff on being friendly and helpful. Which one are they rating? Are they rating the staff because they're helpful or because they're friendly? Because the two are not the same. And you cannot make assumptions when you analyze it. Avoid double negatives. People cannot grasp the concept of double negatives. It confuses them, and quite often because of that, they're not sure what you ask and they tend not to answer your question. You do disagree that it's not necessary. Disagree is a negative, not necessary is a negative. So now what? Avoid difficult recalled questions. How many times did you go to the supermarket last year? Gosh, I don't know. Don't have a clue. If you ask me last week, I can tell you. But last year, it's too vague. There's no waste. Avoid setting. So if you don't have a cell phone, can one of my people contact you? That's setting. That's unethical. Avoid repetitive scaling. So you have a list of questions and every question has the same scale. People get bored and then they stop thinking and they just keep on ticking the same thing. Check when you provide a list of potential answers. Check that you include I don't know, or I'm not sure, or no answer, or other. And remember, those things are not the same. So if you give them a list of chocolates, include other, because there might be a chocolate that you miss out on. So at least then give them the option of other. If you ask them to rate something, they might not be sure how to rate it, so give them that option. Or you ask them maybe their income and they don't want the answer, so give them a no answer. Or I don't know. So really depending on the type of question that you ask, make sure that you include the right word. Check the instruction for each question. Is it only one block that they can tick? Can they tick more than one? If they tick this answer, do they have to go to the next question? Which brings me to number 19, which is the routing of the questionnaires. Then make sure that your questions have a logical flow, that you don't jump all over the place. And that also for your question numbering. I quite often see question 1, 2, and then 4, and then a 4 again, and they skip 3. You confuse the participant and it's unprofessional. Remember, in a quantitative survey, it is not about the language. Limit open-ended questions. First of all, people are lazy to think. So they prefer not to answer it, or they give you a 1 word or 2 words. Secondly, if you ask too many open-ended questions, they really don't answer it. They get fed up with it, and it's also very difficult to analyze. And as I said before, always end your questionnaire with a thank you. Check when you do your questionnaire. Check the time it's going to take you to complete the questionnaire. And then in your introduction, don't say it's going to take a minute or two if it's going to take them 10 minutes. Be honest. Tell the participant that it's going to take them 10 minutes. Now, there are two types of questions, open-ended and closed. Open-ended is they can give you any answer that they deem relevant. You don't give them choices. With closed questions, you'll give them options or choices, and they must answer one of those. And then there are a few scales. There's the Likert scale, which is usually agree to disagree. The semantic differential scale, where you will say, you know, from very expensive to very cheap, where on this continuum does it fit? A ranking scale or a fair comparison. Is it going to be a Ford or Toyota? Is it going to be this or that? Those are sort of the scales that are used most often. And then lastly, when you develop the questionnaire, always pilot test it. And be part of the pilot test. Why? When you pilot test a questionnaire, you ask 2 or 3 people the questions. First of all, you can see, are the questions easy to answer? Or is it really difficult for them to answer? They don't understand what you mean by the question. So they need explanations. Or the answers that they give just don't make sense. So it's not really the right question that you ask. And also you will get a very good sense of how long does it take to complete the interview and whether people will actually get bored. So pilot testing a questionnaire is a crucial element in making sure that your questionnaire is right. Then the proposal. As I said, if you developed a brief, when you do a brief, it's usually after you've done your research brief, you're either going to do the research yourself in-house, or you're going to brief one agency or more than one research agency. And they, in return, will then give you a research proposal. Now, we've earlier discussed all the elements of a research proposal, but in the research proposal, the agency demonstrates that they understand the brief and the business problem. They understand the problem in a research context, and that they can also now demonstrate to you, prove to you, that they have the knowledge, they have the skills, they have the resources to conduct this project for you. So it's their opportunity to prove to you that they can do it. So the building blocks of a research proposal is they must give you also background information. They must show to you that they have done some further research, some desk research, some secondary research to really understand the research problem. What is their translation of the problem into research objectives? What's the research approach that they recommend and why? You're not just going to accept any approach. There's sampling. How big is the sample? What's the technique? How are they going to collect the data? Is it going to be quantitative, qualitative? How will they process the data? What will the specific analysis be? What output? So what are they going to give you back after they've done steps 1 to 6? What are you going to get back? What are their ethical issues and concerns? What's the timing that they will work accordingly? Will they meet your timing? What is the cost? How much is it going to cost you? What's their experience, skills, and resources? And then any specific terms and conditions. Sorry, Cara, you typed a question. How do they ask this section in the exam? Can you just give me an idea what are you talking about? Questionnaires. When we go back to questionnaires, I have not in the previous exams really seen a lot about questionnaires, questions. What I've seen in some of the other modules is that they ask you to discuss principles of good questionnaire design, or where you have to rectify a questionnaire in terms of questions that do not adhere to sound questionnaire principles, and then you have to rectify it. I hope, but in the previous 3 exams they didn't cover it. I don't know, but that's what happened in the other modules. I hope that will help. Okay, just quickly go back to the proposal. And the terms and conditions, the last aspect of the proposal's terms and conditions. Here, it usually has to do with, do you, as the research user or buyer, need to give them lists of clients, contact numbers? What's the payment going to be? Are you going to pay 50% upfront, 50% at completion? So it's little terms and conditions that applies to this whole project. And when you have more than one research agency, you need to select the best proposal. And the way to collect it is usually to compile an evaluation form where you evaluate each agency on the same criteria. So your evaluation form will have a heading. There will be some instructions on how to complete the form. There will be a column for each research agency with their name and the scale that you will use, and then the headings like the understanding of the research problem, the research objectives, the methodology, the cost, the timing, any special requirements like you're looking for innovation or reporting, etc. So that must be in your evaluation form. And then lastly is the presentation and the report. Now, I haven't seen them covered yet, but just make sure when you put a presentation together, there's always a front page, a content page, introduction. Why did you do this research? The methodology that was used. What were the main findings? A summary and a recommendation. Now, the do's. Make sure that your slides are not too busy, that they're easy to read, the font and the font size. No lengthy paragraphs. People don't want to read. It's not a report. Clear headings. One question per page. If you do comparisons, do the comparisons on one page. If there's an interpretation, on the same page. Do not use question numbers. People don't know what the question numbers are. They will not have the questionnaire in front of them. Make use of visuals. When you present, do not read word for word. Make sure that you understand the story. 2 to 3 minutes per slide. Know your audience and always prepare. The graphs that you can use, it's either a column graph or what we call a vertical graph or a stack graph. It's the same thing. Gender profile for company A, B, C, and D. And there's the same gender profile, but your stack bar adds up to 100%. Horizontal bar, it's the same thing, but now your graphs are horizontal. Pie chart, remember when you use a pie chart, your percentages must always add up to 100%. So I use pie chart to show the male and female profile for company A comparing to company B. I cannot combine it because then my percentages will add up to 200. Cora, I'm not too sure. Like I said, in previous exams, they didn't ask anything about graphs, so I really don't know. But make sure that you understand what the different graphs are if it's asked of you. But I don't know, they haven't asked any graphs in any previous exam papers. A line chart is always over a period of time. So this is the market share trend. since 2007. And then your report, these are the elements that you have to cover in a report. You always start with the title, then followed by the management report or the executive summary, your table of contents, introduction, background, any literature review that you did, problem identification, terms of reference, the methodology, the findings, any discussions, interpretations, your conclusion, your recommendation, and any appendices that you want to apply. And that is your preparation for the exam. Are there any other specific questions? Okay, shoot. I see some of you are typing, so let's just give them a minute or two. Pleasure, Linda, and I hope it goes well in the exam. All the best. It is a pleasure, Cora. I really hope you guys ace it in the exam and that you will do well. Nas, the recording usually takes about 1 or 2 days, but I know quite a few online tutorials are taking place, and Genevieve is quite busy, so I would imagine if you give it till about Friday, I'm pretty sure by end of Friday, everything will be available online. In terms of the sampling techniques, it is really you have to go back to your research problem and your target population to understand which sampling technique will work the best. And that is the easiest way to decide on which sampling technique to use when. To look at your research objectives, what do you want to achieve, and who's your target market. It is a pleasure, guys. All the best. I hope you guys do very well. Keep well. Bye-bye.